For a few weeks in the summer of 2020, World Wrestling Entertainment tried something on Monday Night Raw that felt completely different from the rest of the show. It was called Raw Underground, and from the moment Shane McMahon introduced it, the concept was presented as a gritty, lawless battleground where normal rules no longer applied. It looked darker. It sounded rougher. It was shot differently, staged differently, and clearly meant to feel more like an underground fight scene than a standard wrestling segment. For a brief moment, it felt like the company was trying to create a whole new lane inside Raw. That is exactly why Raw Underground caught people's attention so quickly. It did not look like the polished, brightly lit version of World Wrestling Entertainment that viewers were used to. It was stripped down, crowded by onlookers, and built around short, violent-looking fights. Shane McMahon's presentation of the concept made it clear that the company wanted this to feel raw, unpredictable, and more dangerous than the rest of the program. On the surface, that sounded promising. In a period when wrestling companies were trying different formats and production styles, Raw Underground at least had a distinct identity. And for a moment, that distinct identity worked in its favor. The concept gave certain performers a chance to show a different side of themselves. Wrestlers with amateur MMA or striking backgrounds looked naturally suited for it. The company used names like Dabba-Kato, Arturo Ruas, Dolph Ziggler, Shayna Baszler, Braun Strowman, Kevin Owens, and Aleister Black in or around the segments, trying to make Raw Underground feel like a place where a different kind of toughness mattered. In theory, that gave the show something valuable: variety. But that is also where the problems began. Raw Underground was different, but it was not always clear what it was supposed to become. Was it a permanent sub-brand? A fight club concept? A place to build future stars? A showcase for tougher wrestlers? A chaotic attraction Shane McMahon would host for a few weeks and then move on from? The company introduced it with energy, but not with enough structure to make it feel essential. Viewers could understand the vibe almost immediately, but the long-term purpose was much harder to pin down. That kind of uncertainty matters. A successful concept in World Wrestling Entertainment usually has to become more than interesting. It has to become necessary. Hell in a Cell became a feud-ending symbol. Money in the Bank became a career-altering opportunity. Even the company's stranger ideas usually survive only when they find a clear role. Raw Underground never quite did. It had atmosphere, but not enough direction. It had style, but not enough identity beyond that style. There was also the issue of fit. Raw Underground was designed to feel gritty and spontaneous, but it existed inside a much larger television show that was still trying to be many other things at once. On the same episodes, Raw was also juggling major title programs, dramatic promos, faction warfare, and a developing Retribution storyline. That made Raw Underground feel less like a natural extension of the show and more like a separate idea awkwardly dropped into it. Instead of blending into Raw, it often felt like Raw had to pause and switch formats whenever Underground appeared. That kind of tonal split is hard to sustain. A wrestling show can support different moods, but Raw Underground asked viewers to jump from polished sports entertainment into a dimly lit no-rules fight pit and then back again. For some people, that made the segments feel fresh. For others, it made them feel disconnected. The concept was supposed to feel edgy, but it often felt isolated instead. There was also a practical problem built into the presentation. Raw Underground was marketed as chaotic and dangerous, but because it still existed within the company's controlled television environment, it could only go so far. That created a strange middle ground. It was not polished enough to feel like regular company programming, but it was not fully convincing as a brutal alternative either. It was trying to project raw violence while still remaining part of a tightly produced television show. That tension made the presentation feel more performative than immersive, and once the novelty wore off, that became harder to ignore. The first appearance had curiosity on its side. The lighting was different, the pacing was different. Shane McMahon's presence made it feel important, but novelty is only the first test. After that, a concept has to prove that it can create meaningful stories, elevate talent, or become a reliable attraction. Raw Underground struggled to do that. It produced moments, it produced a mood, but it never really produced a compelling reason that the larger show needed it every week. That may be the clearest explanation for why it failed. Raw Underground was not a total disaster in the way some infamous gimmick matches were disasters. It was more temporary than that. It felt like an experiment the company was interested in trying, but not committed to building. The official timeline reflects that short lifespan clearly. It debuted on August 3rd, 2020, remained a featured part of Raw through August and into September, and then quietly faded from the program. By late September, it was already feeling less like the future of Raw and more like a concept that had run out of road. And in the end, that is the real story of Raw Underground. It failed because it was built on atmosphere more than purpose. It had a look, it had an attitude, it had a hook, but it never developed the kind of narrative importance or structural clarity needed to last in world wrestling entertainment. It was introduced like a revolution, functioned like a weekly curiosity, and disappeared like an experiment the company had decided not to keep running. That is why Raw Underground still gets talked about. Not because it changed the business, and not because it became a classic, but because it was such a strange swing. For a few weeks, World Wrestling Entertainment tried to turn part of Raw into an underground fight world. The idea was bold, the execution was uneven, and once the initial curiosity faded, there was not enough substance underneath it to keep it alive.